The Carter family mansion in Oakwood, Ontario, commanded attention from the moment one passed through its wrought iron gates. Built in 1887 by a lumber baron, the three-story Victorian stood behind a circular driveway lined with perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. On this Easter Sunday, the estate radiated a calculated charm that Dylan Carter had spent weeks orchestrating. Dylan adjusted his platinum cufflinks, an anniversary gift from Naomi, and surveyed the great hall with the same critical eye he used to evaluate investment portfolios. At 42, his temples showed the first traces of distinguished silver, but his tailored navy suit concealed the slight softening of his athletic build. "The florist placed those arrangements too close to the door," Dylan muttered, striding across the marble foyer. He repositioned a cascade of white lilies and pastel tulips, nostrils flaring at the competing scents. Better. The Hendersons arrive first, and Patricia notices everything. A server passing with a tray of champagne flutes paused. Dylan lifted one, took a small sip, and grimaced. "This isn't properly chilled. Take it back." In the adjacent kitchen, Naomi Carter spoke softly to Mrs. Winters, their cook of 15 years. "The lamb looks perfect," she said, inhaling the aroma of rosemary and garlic. "Would you mind if I added a bit more mint to the sauce?" Mrs. Winters smiled, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "Of course not, Mrs. Carter. Your touch always improves things." At 38, Naomi carried herself with an elegance that seemed effortless, but had been painstakingly cultivated. Her hazel eyes missed nothing, from the slight smudge on a wine glass to the tension in her husband's jaw when something displeased him. She wore a pale blue dress that complemented her olive skin and dark hair swept into a low chignon. The doorbell's deep chime signaled the arrival of the first guests. Naomi's stomach tightened, the familiar pressure of performance beginning. She touched the small locket hidden beneath her dress collar, a gift from her mother that reminded her of who she was before becoming Mrs. Dylan Carter. "I'll get it," Dylan called, his voice shifting effortlessly into the charismatic tenor. He reserved for clients and social occasions. "Showtime," he added with a wink toward Naomi that didn't quite reach his eyes. Naomi followed him to the foyer, arranging her features into the serene smile expected of her. As Dylan opened the heavy oak door, revealing the Hendersons on the porch, she caught the scent of Patricia's overwhelming perfume mingling with the fresh spring air. "Welcome to our home," Naomi said, embracing Patricia while Dylan shook hands with Harold, a banking executive whose support Dylan had been courting for months. "We're so glad you could join us today." Within an hour, the mansion buzzed with the controlled chaos of 36 guests, a carefully curated mix of business associates, old family connections, and strategically valuable new acquaintances. The click of heels on hardwood, the clink of crystal, and the rising murmur of conversation created a symphony of affluence that Dylan conducted with practiced precision. On the surface, everything appeared flawless. Fresh-cut flowers adorned every table. Silver platters bearing delicate canapes circulated seamlessly. The string quartet in the corner played Vivaldi at exactly the right volume to allow conversation while filling awkward silences. Yet beneath this veneer, Naomi felt the familiar undercurrent of tension. She caught Dylan's subtle head shake when she laughed too loudly with the wife of a hedge fund manager. She noticed how he steered conversations away from her childhood or family background when newer guests expressed curiosity. As Naomi excused herself to check on dinner preparations, she caught her reflection in an antique mirror. The woman staring back wore the uniform of belonging, designer dress, tasteful jewelry, perfect makeup, but her eyes held a question that 15 years of marriage hadn't answered. How long could she play this part before the seams began to show? Naomi hadn't always moved through grand halls with such assurance. 20 years earlier, she'd been Naomi Reyes, daughter of a seamstress who worked from a converted garage in Hamilton's East End. Their small brick house perpetually smelled of fabric sizing and her mother's arroz con gandules, a combination that still brought comfort whenever she encountered either scent. As she directed the staff to begin setting the formal dining table, Naomi's thoughts drifted to her mother's. Hands, always slightly rough, fingertips calloused from years of pushing needles through resistant materials. Those same hands had taught Naomi to sew her first dress, to knead bread dough until it felt like an earlobe, to wipe away tears when neighborhood children mocked her thrift store clothes. "Mrs. Carter, should we use the Waterford crystal? Or the Baccarat today?" The head server's question pulled her back to the present. "The Baccarat, please. Mr. Carter prefers it for special occasions." Naomi brushed an invisible speck from the tablecloth, recalling how she'd once confused the two brands at a dinner party 3 years into their marriage. Dylan hadn't corrected her publicly, but the car ride home had been a masterclass in the importance of distinguishing between luxury items. From the adjacent room, Dylan's confident laugh carried, the one that emerged when he was establishing dominance. In a conversation, she recognized the rhythm of his networking, the initial charm, the strategic compliment, the casual mention of his latest acquisition or achievement. Emily Jenkins, Dylan's younger sister, appeared at Naomi's side with 2 glasses of wine. "Bet you look like you could use this," she said, offering one to Naomi. Unlike her brother, Emily possessed a genuine warmth that privilege hadn't managed to erode. Her successful photography career had been built without leveraging the Carter name, a fact that both frustrated and secretly impressed Dylan. "Thanks," Naomi said, accepting the glass. "How are the natives getting restless?" "Oh, the usual. Richard Palmer is boring everyone with his golf handicap, and Aunt Judith has already asked 3 different people when you and Dylan are planning to have children." Emily rolled, her eyes. "Want me to spill something on her?" Naomi suppressed a laugh. "Tempting, but I've deployed Mrs. Winters to rescue anyone trapped in Judith's orbit. Strategic interruptions with trays of those mushroom puffs she can't resist." They shared a conspiratorial smile, and for a moment, Naomi felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Emily had been her unexpected ally from the beginning, when Dylan first brought Naomi to a Carter family gathering. While others had assessed Naomi with subtle scrutiny, Emily had linked arms with her and whispered commentary about each family, member like they were specimens in a peculiar zoo. "How's Dylan been?" Emily asked, her voice lowering. "He seems more intense lately." Naomi sipped her wine, buying time. "The Jenkins acquisition has been complicated. Long hours." What she didn't mention were the increasingly frequent criticisms, the comments about her accent resurfacing when she was tired, suggestions that her charity work with immigrant families might send mixed signals about the Carter brand, the way he'd begun checking her outfits before events. "You know you can talk to me," Emily said, studying Naomi's face, "about anything." Before Naomi could respond, Dylan appeared, resting his hand possessively on the small of her back. "There you are," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "The Hendersons were just asking about your work with the Literacy Foundation. I thought you might join us." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As Naomi allowed herself to be guided back to the gathering, she caught Emily's concerned gaze. The weight of Dylan's hand on her back felt heavier than usual, a reminder of expectations, of appearances, of the careful performance that had become second nature. The ancient grandfather clock in the hall struck 3, its deep resonance vibrating through the floorboards. Dinner would begin soon, and with it, the real test of the day. Naomi took a steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to play her part in the production of Carter family perfection. At precisely 4 o'clock, Dylan tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon, the high-pitched chime, silencing conversations throughout the main hall. The afternoon light streamed through stained glass panels, casting prisms of color across the parquet floor and highlighting the Easter decorations that transformed the austere mansion into a springtime showcase. "Friends and family," Dylan began, his voice carrying with practiced projection, "Naomi and I welcome you to our annual Easter celebration." He gestured toward his wife with a possessive smile. I believe traditions matter, especially in times when everything around us seems to change too rapidly. Heads nodded in agreement. Dylan had positioned himself before the limestone fireplace, the Carter family crest carved into its mantle looming above him like a silent endorsement of his authority. Before we move to the dining room, I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to the Children's Hospital fundraiser last month. The Carter Foundation exceeded its goal by 20%. He paused for the expected applause. Now, let's enjoy this magnificent feast my wife has arranged. As guests migrated toward the dining room, Richard Palmer clasped Dylan's shoulder. Impressive spread, Carter, though I expected nothing less. His voice carried just enough for nearby guests to hear. Your grandfather would be proud to see how you've maintained standards. Dylan's chest swelled slightly. William, Carter believed appearances reflect character. Some lessons stick with you. Naomi overheard this exchange while directing an elderly couple toward their assigned seats. Her mother-in-law had died before Naomi met Dylan, but William Carter's presence persisted through portraits throughout. The house and the frequent invocations of his business acumen and social philosophies. The dining room table stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, each place setting a museum-worthy arrangement of silver, china, and hand-calligraphed name cards. Floral arrangements in graduated heights allowed conversation to flow freely across the table while maintaining an impression of lush abundance. "You've outdone yourself," whispered Patricia Henderson, running a manicured finger along her napkin's embroidered edge. "Why, these are Irish linen, aren't they? I recognize the pattern from the Bergman wedding." Naomi smiled. "Good eye. They belong to Dylan's grandmother." "How lovely to have family heirlooms," Patricia replied with a pointed glance. "Nothing quite replaces history, does it?" The barb was subtle but familiar. Patricia never failed to reference Naomi's lack of pedigree. Rather than responding, Naomi excused herself to consult with the servers about wine pairings. In the kitchen's controlled chaos, she leaned against a countertop for a moment, closing her eyes. The scent of rosemary and garlic scented her, reminiscent of Sunday dinners from her childhood when they'd roast a small chicken after church. Her mother would play Luis Miguel records while they cooked, teaching Naomi to dance between stirring sauces. 10 minutes until the first course, Mrs. Carter, the head server informed her, breaking her reverie. Naomi straightened her spine and returned to the dining room where Dylan was already seated at the head of the table. She slipped into her chair beside him, accepting his perfunctory cheek kiss. "Everything looks exceptional," he murmured, even though his eyes were scanning the table for imperfections. The meal progressed with orchestrated precision. Servers appeared and disappeared with balletic timing, presenting each course with synchronized movements. Conversation ebbed and flowed around carefully neutral topics: real estate trends, children's university acceptances, upcoming summer travel plans. Dylan dominated discussions, positioning himself as an authority regardless of subject. When James Whitaker mentioned struggles with his vineyard in Niagara, Dylan launched into viticulture principles he'd gleaned from a weekend tour of Napa Valley estates. "The key is understanding soil composition," Dylan proclaimed, swirling his Bordeaux with authority. "Most amateur vintners miss the fundamentals." Naomi noticed James's tight smile. The man had been producing award-winning wines for 15 years. She caught his eye and offered a small, sympathetic glance. The slight relaxation in his features told her he understood her silent acknowledgement. As dessert, a traditional simnel cake surrounded by handcrafted chocolate eggs was being served. Dylan stood to propose another toast. The room quieted again. Forks paused mid-air, all attention directed toward him. Naomi took a sip of water, attempting to quiet the growing unease in her stomach. Something in Dylan's expression, a certain tightness around his mouth, a calculated gleam in his eye, triggered a warning sensation she'd learned never to ignore. "Easter," Dylan began, glass raised, "is about resurrection and renewal, about acknowledging our histories while embracing transformation." His gaze swept the table, making deliberate eye contact with key guests. The Carter family, has always valued transformation in business, in community leadership, and in personal relationships. He placed his hand on Naomi's shoulder, fingers pressing slightly too firmly into her collarbone. My wife is perhaps our family's greatest example of transformation. The subtle shift in the room was immediate, a collective intake of breath, the minute straightening of spines, the alertness that signals impending drama to those attuned to social undercurrents. 15 years ago, Naomi was coordinating volunteer servers at the Hamilton Arts Foundation Gala. His tone carried artificial warmth that made her skin crawl. Now she hosts the gala, thanks to rigorous effort and careful guidance. Patricia Henderson's eyebrows rose fractionally as she exchanged glances with her husband. Emily set her glass down with deliberate control, her expression darkening. While most of you were raised understanding the responsibilities of privilege, Dylan continued, Naomi had to learn them. Her mother, a lovely seamstress from Hamilton's East Side, couldn't teach her which fork to use for fish or how to address a duke. The room temperature seemed to drop. A server hesitated by the doorway, sensing the tension. Yet look at her now. Dylan smiled down at her, his eyes cold, almost indistinguishable from those born to this world. Almost. Naomi's chest tightened, each breath requiring conscious effort. The familiar sensation of being displayed like a curated object, Dylan's personal renovation project, burned through her practiced composure. I share this not to embarrass my wife, he said to the silently watching guests, but to highlight what proper guidance can accomplish. With the right influence, even the most humble beginnings can be. My mother made Princess Margaret's evening gown for her Canadian tour in 1974. Naomi's voice cut through Dylan's monologue, steady. Despite her racing pulse, conversations halted. Even the servers froze in place. She wasn't just a lovely seamstress, Naomi continued, meeting Dylan's startled gaze. Elena Reyes was master-trained in Barcelona before immigrating. Her clients included diplomats, wives, and visiting dignitaries who prized her hand-beating. Technique. She gently removed Dylan's hand from her shoulder and stood, placing her napkin beside her half-eaten dessert. She taught me that quality reveals itself quietly, while insecurity broadcasts its presence. That genuine refinement never announces itself because it doesn't need to. Naomi's hands remained steady as she reached for her water glass. She also taught me which fork to use for fish. The education just didn't come with the bitterness of believing it made me superior to those who might not know. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock's ticking seemed muted by the tension. Dylan's face had drained of color, his jaw tightening visibly. Emily was the first to move, raising her glass toward Naomi with undisguised admiration. To Elena Reyes, she said clearly.
And to her daughter, who honors her legacy every day. Several guests raised their glasses tentatively, caught between social convention and the electric current of disruption. Richard Palmer studied his dessert plate with sudden fascination.
Patricia Henderson's face had frozen in a grimace, disguised as a smile. If you'll excuse me, Naomi said softly. I need to check on coffee service. She walked from the room with measured steps, back straight, chin lifted, posture. Her mother had taught her long before she'd met Dylan Carter. The dining room erupted into murmured conversations the moment she passed through the doorway. In the kitchen's relative safety, Naomi pressed her palms against the cool marble countertop, drawing strength from its solidity. Mrs. Winters silently placed a cup of tea beside her, chamomile with honey, prepared exactly as Naomi's mother used to make it during difficult times. They're already asking for coffee, Mrs. Winters said simply. And Mr. Jenkins asked if we have any brandy for it. Naomi nodded, gathering herself. The confrontation had been 15 years coming. Now that it had arrived, the path forward remained unclear. But she felt something long dormant awakening within her, the certainty that she wouldn't return to the careful performance that had defined her marriage. The silver coffee service trembled slightly in Naomi's hands as she re-entered the dining room, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Conversations faltered momentarily before resuming with artificial enthusiasm, the universal sign of a social disruption being actively processed. Dylan remained at the head of the table, his complexion ashen beneath his tailored composure. He methodically folded and refolded his napkin, a nervous habit she'd observed only during his most significant professional setbacks. "Coffee, Dylan?" Naomi asked, her voice carrying a new timbre, gentle but unbending. He looked up, eyes narrowing as he assessed her. Years of strategic negotiation had taught him to recognize when to retreat and regroup. "Thank you," he replied stiffly, his expression communicating that this battle might be lost, but the war continued. As Naomi moved around the table offering coffee, guests reacted with telling variations. Patricia Henderson declined with a tight smile, suddenly fascinated by her bracelet. Richard Palmer accepted with unexpected deference, actually standing slightly as she approached, a courtesy he typically reserved for women of established pedigree. Most revealing was Harold Jenkins, who looked directly into her eyes and said, "Excellent meal, Mrs. Carter. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become." The simple validation nearly broke her carefully maintained composure. She nodded, momentarily unable to speak. Emily appeared at her side, taking the coffee service. "I'll finish this. Go sit down and enjoy your own dessert," she whispered. "That was magnificent, by the way. I've waited 15 years to see someone put him in his place." Returning to her seat, Naomi felt the weight of Dylan's gaze. The dining room suddenly seemed too confining. The elaborate place settings and formal arrangements, a physical manifestation of the constraints she'd accepted for too long. "Perhaps we should move to the garden terrace," she suggested, addressing the table at large. "The evening air is perfect, and the cherry trees are beginning to blossom." Without waiting for Dylan's approval, a small but significant departure from protocol, she stood. "We can have digestives served outside." Dylan's jaw tightened at this usurpation of his authority, but several guests were already standing, clearly eager for fresh air and the promise of less confined conversation clusters where they could dissect what they'd witnessed. The evening light cast long shadows across the immaculate lawns as guests migrated outside. The tension in the dining room dispersed somewhat in the open air, though small groups formed with predictable allegiances. Dylan's business associates clustered near him by the stone balustrade, while others gravitated toward Naomi near the flowering cherry trees. "Your mother sounds remarkable," said Claire Whitaker, an art historian whose own background lacked the financial advantages of her husband James. "Did she teach you her beading technique?" Naomi smiled, touching her necklace unconsciously. "She tried. I never had her patience for detail work." The admission felt liberating, acknowledging a limitation without shame. "But she did teach me to recognize quality craftsmanship. The embroidery on your jacket is exquisite, by the way." Claire beamed. "Thank you. I found this small atelier in Montreal run by a Vietnamese woman who does couture-level work." As they discussed textile arts with genuine enthusiasm, Naomi noticed Emily engaged in intense conversation with Dylan. Her sister-in-law's animated gestures and Dylan's defensive posture suggested a confrontation brewing. When Emily jabbed her finger into Dylan's chest, something few would dare, several guests pretended not to notice while watching peripherally. "If you'll excuse me," Naomi said to Claire, moving toward the escalating sibling conflict. As she approached, Emily's voice became audible. "Treated her like a project since day one. Do you even see her as a person?" Dylan's response was clipped, controlled. "You don't understand the position we need to maintain. Image matters in our circles." "Your circles," Emily corrected. "Not mine, not Naomi's, until you decided to—" "It's all right, Emily," Naomi interrupted, her hand gently touching her sister-in-law's arm. "This isn't the time." Dylan's relief at her intervention was momentary, replaced by wariness as she turned toward him. "We should attend to our guests," Naomi said simply. "We can discuss this later." The subtle shift in authority, her granting him reprieve rather than the reverse, wasn't lost on anyone present. Several guests exchanged glances, social hierarchies recalibrating before their eyes. As twilight descended, garden lights illuminated automatically around the terrace, bathing the gathering in a soft glow. Staff circulated with cordials and digestives on silver trays. The facade of normality gradually reasserted itself, though undercurrents of discord remained palpable. Naomi caught her reflection in a window, her image superimposed over the lighted garden scene. For the first time since arriving at the Carter estate 15 years ago, she truly recognized herself. By 9 o'clock, most guests had departed, leaving behind empty glasses, scattered napkins, and the lingering uncertainty of a social order disturbed. The staff moved silently through the rooms, restoring order with practiced efficiency. Naomi thanked each of them individually as they completed their tasks, a courtesy Dylan had always considered unnecessary. In the library, Dylan poured, himself a third scotch, swirling the amber liquid as he stared into the unlit fireplace. The room's walnut paneling and leather-bound books had always reinforced his sense of legacy and authority. Tonight, they felt like props in a play whose script had suddenly changed. "You humiliated me," he said without turning as Naomi entered. His voice lacked its usual commanding edge, instead carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability that momentarily disarmed her. "That wasn't my intention." She remained by the doorway, maintaining distance both physical and emotional. "But you humiliated me first, Dylan, not just tonight, for years." He turned then, studying her as if seeing someone unfamiliar. "I gave you everything. This house, this life, access to people and opportunities you'd never have had." "You gave me things," she agreed, moving toward the leather armchair opposite his. "But you took something more valuable, my sense of self. You made me believe that who I was before you wasn't enough." The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, its resonance filling the momentary silence between them. "That wasn't my intention either," he finally said, echoing her words. Emily appeared in the doorway, her overnight bag in hand. "My cab's here. I'm heading back to the city tonight instead of staying." Dylan's expression hardened, running away from family drama as usual. "Actually, I'm giving you both space to have a conversation that's 15 years overdue." Emily crossed to Naomi, embracing her with genuine warmth. "Call me tomorrow, okay? Whatever you decide." The implication hung in the air as Emily departed, her footsteps fading down the hallway. The front door opened and closed, leaving the mansion in weighted silence. Naomi studied Dylan's face, the familiar features arranged in an unfamiliar expression of uncertainty. In their years together, she'd seen him confident, angry, satisfied, frustrated, but rarely lost. "What did Emily mean by, 'whatever you decide'?" he asked, his knuckles whitening around his crystal tumbler. "I think we both know." Naomi's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "Things can't continue as they have been." Dylan stood abruptly, moving to the bar cart to refill his glass. His movements betrayed tension, the controlled precision that normally characterized his actions, giving way to small inefficiencies. "You're overreacting to one comment at dinner. I was complimenting your transformation." "It wasn't a compliment, Dylan. It was a reminder of what you consider my proper place." She remained seated, finding strength in stillness. And it wasn't one comment. It was the culmination of 1,000 small cuts over 15 years. The ice clinked against his glass as his hand trembled slightly. "What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I apologize if what I said offended you." "If," Naomi raised an eyebrow. "And I want more than words. I want change." Dylan returned to his chair, his expression cycling through defensiveness, anger, and finally, most surprisingly, fear. "What kind of change?" he asked cautiously. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I know I can't keep pretending to be something I'm not. I'm proud of my background, my family, my heritage. I won't hide them anymore to make you comfortable. Outside, headlights swept across the darkened windows as Mrs. Winters departed for the night. The house settled around them, creaking and sighing as old houses do. You knew who I was. When we married, Dylan said after a long pause. The expectations, the social obligations. You agreed to all of it. I agreed to be your wife, not your creation. Naomi leaned forward. And you knew who I was too, or you should have. But you never really saw me, Dylan. You saw a project. He flinched at the accusation. And for a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built around their relationship showed its first substantial crack. What happens now? He asked, placing his tumbler on the side table with deliberate care. Naomi felt an unexpected wave of compassion for him. Despite his flaws, despite the years of subtle undermining, Dylan was still the man she had once fallen in love with. Brilliant, driven, occasionally capable of surprising tenderness. Now, she said softly, we decide if we can build something authentic from the ruins of what we pretended to have. The question hung between them, unanswered, as the mansion's shadows lengthened around them. Morning light filtered through the guest room curtains, rousing Naomi from fitful sleep. The unfamiliar bed, her choice after last night's confrontation, felt symbolic of her current state. Still within the Carter mansion, but displaced from her usual position. She traced the embroidered pattern on the duvet cover, following the intricate vines and flowers with her fingertip, as she had traced the seams of her mother's work as a child. The house remained unusually quiet. No sounds of Dylan's morning. Routine, his shower running precisely 7 minutes, the coffee grinder at 6:45, the kitchen television tuned to financial news. After 15 years of synchronized mornings, the silence felt both disconcerting and liberating. When Naomi finally ventured downstairs, she found Dylan at the kitchen island, still in his robe, staring into a cold cup of coffee. Dark. Circles beneath his eyes suggested his night had been no more restful than hers. He looked up, his expression uncharacteristically tentative. I cancelled my meetings today, he said. The admission itself a significant departure from routine. Dylan Carter never cancelled meetings. Naomi nodded, moving to the coffee maker to prepare her own cup. The familiar actions, measuring grounds, filling the water reservoir, provided a moment to gather her thoughts. I've been thinking about what you said, Dylan continued, turning the cold mug between his palms, about not seeing you. I didn't sleep much. Naomi added a splash of cream to her coffee, watching the liquid transform from black to caramel. Neither did I. They sat in silence for several minutes, the kitchen clock ticking steadily amid the tension. Through the window, Naomi watched a pair of cardinals flit between branches of the maple tree, the female's subtle coloring complementing her mate's brilliant plumage rather than diminishing her own importance. I called Dr. Levine this morning, Dylan finally said, naming his former therapist. I've scheduled an appointment for tomorrow. Naomi looked up, surprised. Dylan had briefly seen Dr. Levine 3 years earlier during a particularly stressful acquisition, but had dismissed therapy as unnecessary once the situation resolved. That's a good step, she acknowledged, measuring her response. I also called Emily. His admission carried the weight of significant effort. Dylan rarely initiated reconciliation with his sister after their frequent clashes. She didn't hold back her opinions about my behavior. A small smile tugged at Naomi's lips despite herself. I imagine not. She said something that kept me awake most of the night. Dylan finally met her gaze directly. She asked if I was so afraid of not being good enough that I needed to make you feel the same way. The directness of the question hung between them. For the first time in their marriage, Naomi saw something crumble in Dylan's carefully constructed facade. Not weakness exactly, but a crack in the armor he'd maintained since childhood. "Are you?" she asked quietly. Dylan's fingers tightened around his mug. "My grandfather used to say that Carter men are judged by 3 things: their business acumen, their social standing, and their wives' ability to enhance both." He exhaled slowly. "I never questioned it." "That's a lot of pressure to put on a relationship," Naomi observed, the understatement intentional. "It's no excuse." Dylan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "When we met, I was genuinely captivated. By you, your warmth, your intelligence, how you connected with people authentically. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing those qualities as liabilities rather than strengths." Outside, gardeners arrived to begin spring maintenance, the distant hum of equipment providing a mundane counterpoint to their extraordinary conversation. "I need some time, Dylan." Naomi cradled her mug, drawing warmth from its smooth ceramic surface. "Space to rediscover who I am, without your expectations shaping me." Pain flickered across his features, but he nodded. "What does that mean practically?" "I'm going to stay with Emily in the city for a while." She'd made the decision during her sleepless night. "I called her this morning after you came downstairs." Dylan's jaw tightened, his instinct to control the situation visibly warring with his newfound resolution. "For how long?" "I don't know yet." Honesty felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "That depends on both of us." He absorbed this, his businessman's mind clearly cataloging implications and contingencies. Finally, he asked, "What about the Jameson Charity Gala next month?" "We're co-chairs." The question revealed so much about his priorities that Naomi nearly laughed. Instead, she replied evenly, "I'll fulfill my commitments, but not as a performance of being the perfect Carter wife." Dylan nodded slowly, an acceptance gradually replacing resistance in his expression. I understand." After a pause, he added, "Whatever you need to take with you. I won't strip the house, Dylan," she interjected, with unexpected lightness. "Most of these things never really felt like mine anyway." His flinch told her the barb had landed, but instead of defensiveness, his response carried a new note of self-awareness. "I'd like to work on that, making this home feel like yours too. When you decide to return." The conversation's tentative hope, neither a resolution nor a separation, but something honest emerging between them, felt like the first tender shoot breaking through hardened ground. 6 weeks later, Naomi stood in Emily's loft apartment, surrounded by early morning light and half-packed boxes. The temporary refuge had become a space of rediscovery. Walls adorned with family photos Emily had helped her frame, including several of her mother that had remained in storage during her marriage. A sewing machine occupied one corner, Naomi's clumsy attempts at reclaiming her mother's skill producing more frustration than garments. But the effort itself felt healing. Her phone vibrated with a message from Dylan. "Take your time with the packing, no rush. Dinner reservation at 7 if you're still comfortable with that." The careful phrasing, giving her space, respecting her agency, reflected tangible change over recent weeks. Their initial separation had evolved into a careful, deliberate reconnection, first weekly lunches in neutral locations, then gradually more meaningful conversations about their individual therapy sessions and realizations. Emily emerged from her bedroom, coffee in hand. "Moving day. You sure about this?" "Not entirely," Naomi admitted, folding a sweater into a suitcase. "But I'm sure about trying." Emily studied her over the rim of her mug. "He's making an effort. Even I have to admit that." The changes in Dylan had been subtle but significant. He'd begun asking questions about Naomi's childhood and actually listening to her answers. He'd accompanied her to Hamilton to visit her mother's grave, standing quietly as she spoke in Spanish to the woman he'd only ever acknowledged in abstract terms. Most surprisingly, he'd started individual therapy sessions in addition to their couples counseling. confronting generational patterns he'd previously defended as family tradition. "He is," Naomi agreed, "but so am I. That's the difference. Now, we're both doing the work." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Naomi checked her watch, confused. Dylan's not supposed to be here for another hour. Emily opened the door to reveal a delivery person holding a large, flat package. Delivery for Naomi Carter? After signing, Naomi carefully unwrapped the item, a framed black and white photograph she immediately recognized, despite never having seen it before. Her mother, perhaps 30 years old, bent over an elaborate gown, needle poised mid-stitch, her expression one of absolute concentration and pride. A note accompanied it in Dylan's precise handwriting. "Found this in the Royal Ontario Museum archives." The photographer documented local artisans in 1980. "Thought you might want this piece of your history in our home." Detour, tears welled unexpectedly. The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the image itself, but the effort to find it, the acknowledgement of her heritage as valuable, spoke volumes about the journey they'd both undertaken. "Well," Emily said softly, examining the photograph, "that's actually perfect." Later that afternoon, Naomi returned to the Carter mansion carrying only a small suitcase and the framed photograph. The house appeared subtly different, the formal flower arrangements in the foyer replaced by wildflowers in pottery vases. Family photos, previously confined to private spaces, now adorned tables alongside the Carter heirlooms. Dylan greeted her in the entryway, his expression a complex mix of hope and uncertainty. "Welcome home," or "Welcome back, at least." "Thank you for the photograph," she said, holding it carefully. "It means more than I can say." He nodded, maintaining the respectful distance they'd established during their separation. "Where would you like to hang it?" The question, simple yet profound in its implication that her preferences mattered, crystallized how far they'd come. "In the library, I think," she decided. "Beside your grandfather's portrait." Understanding flickered in Dylan's eyes, the symbolism of placing her heritage alongside his, neither diminished by the other's presence. As they walked through the house together, Naomi noticed other, small changes, books in Spanish on the nightstand, a framed recipe card in her mother's handwriting in the kitchen, spaces cleared of pretension and performative elegance. "And I've been thinking about what home really means," Dylan said as they hung the photograph. "Not as a showcase or a statement, but as a reflection of the people who live in it." Outside the window, the garden had transformed with spring's full arrival. The formal tulip beds remained, but wildflowers now grew alongside them, their seeming disorder creating a more vibrant, authentic beauty. "We have a long way to go," Naomi acknowledged, studying her mother's photograph, now hanging beside William Carter's stern portrait. Different worlds coexisting with equal dignity. We do," Dylan agreed. "But I'm committed to the journey if you are." He hesitated before adding, "I'm learning that perfection is less interesting than authenticity and far less worthy of love." Naomi looked around the room, at the mansion that had often felt like a beautiful prison, now slowly transforming into a possible home. The evening light cast long shadows through the windows, illuminating old spaces in new ways. Nothing was certain, nothing was perfect, but something genuine was finally taking root. "One day at a time," she said, turning toward the future. They might build together, not as a society couple maintaining appearances, but as two people choosing each other with clear eyes and authentic hearts. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. What rating would you give it and why? 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.